This video is brought to you by Milanote. In a world where beige minimalism has taken over the interior design status quo, I love a good eccentric lamp. I can't think of a better way to inject a space with personality than for a novelty banana lamp to be bathing a room in its warm glow. The world is your oyster, there are endless possibilities. But of course, the ultimate possibility is to make your own eccentric lamp. I've actually already done this before. Last year, I made my very own eccentric mushroom lamp.
Editor's note, that was actually 2 years ago, oh my gosh.
And it is one of my favorite things that I now own. I use it pretty much every day. Get used up a bunch of old like foam scraps and materials that I had lying around that probably would have gotten thrown out otherwise. For this one, I upcycled an ancient ugly lamp that I got from the thrift store. It was just a good time. So since my office space is slowly transforming into the surface of Fallujah, I thought, why not do it again? I currently have a standing lamp in the corner of my office that is slowly falling apart. It was thrifted several years ago, already in a slight state of disrepair, and currently it is literally being held up by being propped against my couch because the neck is wobbly like
The threads that screw it into the base are probably stripped at this point. I don't know how easy reviving her would be.
I'm pretty sure one of the lamps itself also has a short in it. This lamp is in desperate need of an upgrade, so I thought, why replace it with something that looks normal whenever I could give it a little bit of a floral twist? Also, nothing else in there at this point looks normal, and if I try to put something normal in there, now that looks out of place. So I have a couple of different points of inspiration for my idea. The first one are these like floral lotus-shaped lamps. I think they're from like the 60s or 70s maybe. I see them online from time to time, and I think they're absolutely gorgeous, and I know that getting one vintage secondhand would be just like a little bit out of my price range right now. My second point of inspiration are these very specific floral lanterns. I'm pretty sure there's like one person that makes these, and the rest of my idea for this piece is absolutely nothing new. I just want to make the aesthetic match everything else that I've made for my office so far. So fake logs, fake rocks, fake moss, and then I'm also thinking about adding some more bioluminescent mushrooms to this because I did that on my mushroom mirror that I made for my room as well. So I thought, why not use it again? But so far, these are just the rough esoteric ideas for this lamp. To help me visualize and brainstorm this project, I will be using this video's sponsor, Milanote. If you don't already know, Milanote is a tool for organizing crafting projects just like this one, but also for any creative project that you can possibly think of. You can choose from over 100 different project plan templates to get you started. And for this one, I chose the craft project plan template because it gives me a really good overview of the different visual elements that I might need to plan for this project. Once you select a template, Milanote provides you with lots of empty preloaded organizational tools to help you start planning. So let me give you a little tour of how my boards turned out. So this is the main page of my project board. As you can see here, the project is kind of already perfectly laid out in front of me. I was able to add in my main design image here along with a bunch of other key inspiration images. I could go onto the side panel here and drag out things like color palettes so that I can just select the color palette from my design image and have it right here on my boards. I could create this project task list to kind of organize my process a lot better than I did on previous projects like this. As I go, I can check off tasks, and I also have them listed here in chronological order. I have these boards here that tell me exactly what I need to do for each individual element. Here I have created an overall lamp mood board that details like all of the different aspects of my inspiration. And if I go into my other boards here, they explore subcategories. So here I have a board dedicated to the individual flower petals that I'm going to make and the various methods that I could possibly use. Here I've utilized the draw tool a lot, which I really love because it allows you to just draw directly on your boards and really have like a fluid, organic process to all of your note making. If you want to make notes in a little bit more of a clean way, you can just drag out a note here and type in whatever you want. Moving along to this board, I have plans for my little hot glue bioluminescent mushrooms and also for some glowing crystals that I want to make. You can even paste and drag out links to things like tutorials or websites that I might need to reference along the process. I have a product materials list, which is also great because I can keep my shopping list all in one place and I don't forget anything that I might need to purchase prior to actually starting the project. I typically begin building my Milanote boards by gathering images on Pinterest. Then from there, I can easily use the Milanote web clipper browser extension to easily sort all of those pins into whichever folder I need them to be in. The tool is free, it's super simple to use and speeds up the process so much. And finally, this is not something that I personally utilized on this project, but Milanote also has a collaboration mode where you can send an editing link to coworkers and collaborators, and all of you can interact with and build out and collaborate on your boards in real time, which is something that I have used in the past and a feature that I think is really cool. So if you're planning your own impulsive springtime DIY or creative project anytime soon, Milanote is free to use with no time limit, so sign up for a free Milanote account using the link in the description. Thank you as always to Milanote for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get building. Okay, so ordinarily for a DIY with this, I would just take my existing lamp that's falling apart and try to fix it up a little bit and then do all this stuff to it. Frankly, I don't know if it's going to really hold up to that, and I would rather not do this to a lamp that's falling apart for the sake of the longevity of this piece. So our victim today is this fella. Just a generic floor lamp. Got 5 bulbs on it. I thought that would be a good configuration of flowers to have on. Let's open this baby up. So far, it looks like a lamp. Ooh, it's got one of these like little presser things. Oh, I love one of these. It looks like something out of Alien.
I also got fancy RGB LED color changing light bulbs for this project that you connect to via Bluetooth with your phone. Once the lamp was all assembled, I screwed all of those in and then downloaded the app so that I could set the colors for all of the light bulbs through Bluetooth. And while I was at it, I also tested the LEDs that I got as the light source for my bioluminescent mushrooms.
It's gonna look like an acid trip. I can't wait.
Now I want you to take a good hard look at this lamp because it's the last time that it is going to look normal.
So first things first, I need to start building up the base of my lamp here. And as much as possible, I have tried not to buy new materials like foam and stuff like that for this project. So instead, we're gonna be stash busting, baby. You guys probably know I don't like throwing away stuff, especially not stuff that I can put into my rat pile to later make things out of. Thankfully, I should have plenty of materials to work with. You guys want a quick stash tour? In here, we've got like fresh foam sheets, unused foam bevels, unused high-density EVA foam from who knows what project. Just all of this. I have some leather scraps in here. More foam dowels. I don't even know what this is. Failed mock-ups that I probably need to use. My point here being that I have a box of nonsense that I need to use up, and a project like this is really perfect for stash busting because at this point, to build up the lamp, I really just need bulk and sturdy items to create that bulk. And finally, I have a brother who is a nurse and occasionally donates unused hospital waste to me. There's absolutely no biological material on any of these, but obviously the hospital can't use them once you like open up the package, so I'm pretty sure the IV tubing will work really well to be like facade vines. This process is very intuitive and sculptural for me, so at this point, I'm not sure if there's anything else to do but just get into it and start feeling out the forms.
I ended up having less garbage on hand than I thought I did. I didn't end up finding the spare pool noodles I had from taking this thing apart. This is why you don't throw out your trash, kids. So I just ended up improvising by using a lot of spare craft foam. The pro of this is that I used up a lot of spare craft foam that I've had around for like 10 years. The con of this is that the base is a good bit heavier than it really needed to be. I was hoping to fill a lot of that space with more lightweight foam to avoid that, but it is what it is. It's not like I'm going to be moving this thing around that much.
So I have a bunch of these leftover puzzle piece edges here, which is pretty annoying, but with these, I'm gonna do what I did last time, cut these up and turn them into rocks.
I also cut a ton of scrap 3mm EVA foam into a bunch of different abstract shapes so that I could use them as fake bark, because I also wanted some fallen tree branches in my design. And to make those, I took some packing inserts and glued them together to make more of a log shape, and just hot glued a bunch of my little foam scraps on top of that, and a puzzle piece collage pattern, trying to make it look as much like bark as possible. But if it's not perfect, that's okay, because I'm also going to texture this a little bit more later. We interrupt your current programming for an indecisive cat moment. Of course, everything was looking pretty messy at this point, so I started blending everything together and covering things up with the EVA foam rocks that I had made earlier, and also with a ton of foam clay. For the rocks, I kind of just glued them on top of the existing rock shelves that I had, and in little gaps in any place that was messy that I wanted to cover things up. And for the foam clay, I generally did the same, but I especially wanted to get foam clay in any gaps and grooves that would be difficult to get to later. I wanted to cover up any edges that looked a little bit too clean and uniform. I wanted to blend edges of rocks, cover up any hot glue. It was a pretty straightforward patching process, and I especially did not worry too much about putting in any detail. Texturing all of this will come after the foam clay is dry.
So now my lamp base is pretty much fully detailed, fully sculpted. I got all my rocks on there, but the thing about foam clay is that it doesn't really hold detail after it dries once you've like sculpted it in there. So when I use foam clay, I usually don't go to the trouble of detailing it whenever I'm sculpting with it at all. Usually I just wait until it dries, and then I just grab a handy dandy Dremel and a wood burning tool, and I just carve in all of the details after the fact.
Thing about detailing foam this way is you can be as messy as you want. There's almost no skill or precision involved. Making rocks is just weathering stuff. It's just denting things up and putting grooves and holes into it. When I do this with the wood burner or Dremel, I'm thinking a little bit about the placement of things, but I'm mostly thinking become erosion. I put a little bit more thought into things whenever I'm carving into the plant parts, but it basically boils down to parallel curvy lines, the occasional vein or indent. It really doesn't take much effort to make this look like something, but I do have to put a little bit more thought into carving the fake bark. Tree bark has a little bit of a pattern going on, so whenever I'm working on these, I just keep a reference photo on hand, and I try to capture the general shapes. Again, with this, I find it doesn't take much to actually make it look like something, and if you get close enough, it'll pretty much look like wood. Finally, I also made sure to heat seal everything with my heat gun. And next it was time to make some UV resin gemstones. I wanted to include a couple of glowing gemstones at the base of my lamp, and thankfully I have some silicone molds on hand that are pretty much perfect for this. The only problem is they're not hollow, and I do want to put the LEDs inside of the gemstones, so I decided to improvise a little bit by just curing the UV resin in the gemstones one face at a time. That way I could turn the silicone mold on its side in the sun as it sets, and then just rotate it per side until the entire thing is cured, allowing the inside of the mold to remain hollow. I wasn't sure how well this was going to work at first because I'm just not the best at staying clean with UV resin, but it worked pretty much perfectly actually, and whenever I popped the gemstones out of the molds, they looked like
pure glass.
You know I had to do it. I was rewatching Breaking Bad while I was working on this project. Anyways, in the end I made 13 of these, and I don't know why I made so many, but I just, I wanted to have options.
So the next order of business is to begin working on the flower lampshades. The method that I've settled on for these is to make them out of a combination of like floral wire and then put organza over that, because I have a lot of spare scrap organza just laying around in my fabric stash, and I'm probably just gonna assemble those together with some good old-fashioned hot glue. Some of you guys are going to absolutely hate that, but it's okay. I also need to figure out how I'm going to attach these onto the light bulbs themselves. I haven't quite decided that yet, but I'm thinking I might repurpose the lampshades that it came with and kind of just put everything on top of that, because they do have a mechanism that allows them to easily attach over the light bulb and everything. I'm gonna have to figure that out. But before I think about assembling or doing anything else, I do need to be responsible and do a mock-up for the flower petals.
I did decide to build my flower petals directly onto these little lampshades. Pattern the petals themselves, I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted the flowers to look, but I based them loosely on my design image, and I decided to do 2 layers of 5 petals, one bigger and one smaller. I mocked the flowers up by taping the petals onto the lampshades, and even though the petals weren't posable yet, they looked decent enough, so I decided to start making the actual petals. I did this by taking some floral wire and molding it into the shape of the flower to serve as a frame. I then patterned out the fabric part out of some scrap organza, making sure to leave a quote seam allowance so that I can glue that around the frame. And I then just slapped those two pieces together with a little bit of hot glue, and they looked fine.
First set of the outer petals are now done. I think that they're coming along pretty well. I think that the floral wire was a really nice fit for this because it's nice and soft and flexible, but still rigid enough with the organza to hold its form. I think the organza is also good because it provides some transparency, but also a nice sheen, and hopefully this should also be good to paint on top of. I still have to do a test for that because I don't know exactly how paint will react with this fabric, but hopefully it should be pretty good. So now I just have to do that 4 more times. And then 5 more times for all the petals on the inside. I think I'm going to go insane, but that's okay. Oh, hi, Tiger. Hello, do you want to say hi? Producer, sweet baby.
Like I said, doing these individually by hand took absolutely forever, and given the time-consuming nature, I was also a little bit sloppy with some of these. With 5 sets of 5 for the large outer petals and also 5 sets of 5 for the smaller inner petals, that made a total of 50 handmade petals on this project. Hand making those is precisely as soul draining as it sounds, so I tried my best to make them as cleanly as possible, but they weren't perfect, and making these even spilled into another day that I hadn't planned on. I absolutely loved that, but apparently that wasn't even masochistic enough for me because I also went back towards the end of this project and made an additional 13 leaves. You know, I thought, why not subject myself to the continuous pain of constant hot glue burns? The punishment of using hot glue for everything should fit the crime.
So now the base of my lamp is fully sculpted and everything, the next step is going to be to put like a layer of base paint on this so that I can start getting into the painting phase. However, I do have a little bit of a problem. I also need to figure out how I'm going to install these. Oh my god, that's so distracting. Stop. My main problem here is that if I install these with like hot glue and everything and try to blend it in before I base paint, I would have to figure out how to mask each of these little LEDs off pretty much individually, which I do not feel like doing at all. That's overkill. But also, if I do this after I base paint it, I then have to figure out a way to hide the cord. At this point, I just don't know what method is going to be less annoying and time consuming in the long run. I'm kind of opting towards just base painting it and then making this a problem for later Kira, which has been happening a lot in this project. I'm so sorry, later Kira. I don't really see a way around it, unfortunately. Maybe I can cover these up with moss or something. I'm sure that I can figure something out, but let's at least take care of this.
When my lamp was dry, I returned indoors to begin solving my LED conundrum. I decided to go about this in basically the same way I did whenever I was doing the bioluminescent mushrooms on my mirror. For that one, I took an awl and poked through the foam and basically just fed the LEDs through to the other side so that the cord is underneath or behind the foam and the wires aren't showing quite as much. Unfortunately, I can't commit to this method on this entire piece since there's not places to hide the cords everywhere, but in the places where that isn't happening, I'm planning on either hiding it with some moss, some other mushrooms or foliage, or I'll just actually disguise it as a stem or a vine. I'm hoping that some combination of these will hide it enough and prevent it from looking like I just have a Christmas tree strung up. Very much not the look I'm going for. This plan sounds simple enough, but installing these was actually pretty difficult because I had to plan for where every single mushroom or gemstone was going to go, and I had to run the lights in such a way where the wires were going to be hidden, but I could also get each individual LED where it needed to go. And pretty early on, I realized that I had focused too many of the lights down by the base, and I didn't know if I was going to have enough of these to reach the top. Thankfully, I had another set of these just lying around in my drawer, so I actually ended up installing 2 100 light LED sets in this lamp, which is honestly probably a little bit too many. Having 2 sets in one is a little overwhelming, but in the end, I tried to group everything in a way that flowed and made sense, and I glued the LEDs so that each gemstone would have at least 3 LEDs on the inside, sometimes 4, and I also tried tried to group the mushrooms in groups of like 3 or 4 and just in ways that made sense and matched some reference photos that I saw.
Alright, I think that for the most part worked. I know at this point it probably looks really overwhelming and busy. There's just like a lot of lights going on. It looks like a Christmas tree. But don't worry, later on I'm going to be covering some of this up, diffusing it so that it has like different levels of brightness, but I want a lot of mushrooms. I want it to look magical, so for now, we're just gonna have to trust the process on this. But now I do want to shift gears and start working on my lampshades. Now, I have already taken the liberty of going and cutting the lampshade bases into kind of a flower shape so that they blend in with the petals that I've made a little bit more. Wasn't sure if this was going to work, but just taking a pair of wire cutters to these pretty much did the trick. So next I need to take these and all of the petals that I have made and put them all together. And I think I am once again just going to do this with a little bit of hot glue. I, at this point, am just wondering when is Big Hot Glue going to sponsor the channel? Because I not only think that would be really, really funny, but I think you really are getting to your target demographic with this sort of nonsense. The basic layout of this that I've planned is for these petals to kind of go in between these, and then these petals go in between those, and it sort of makes this shape, and then I can pose everything because these are made of wire. I think that should work well enough, honestly. I just need to make sure that I leave this part intact so that I can actually attach them back onto the light. That is looking pretty good. Let's do the rest.
Since the lamps needed to be posable, I grabbed some scrap green fabric that I had around and began wrapping some of that around the necks of the lamps, securing that in place with a little bit of hot glue. And then I took some clear Elmer's glue and gave each neck a coat of that to keep the fabric in place and prevent it from having any fraying edges or flyaways, just to clean everything up a little bit. And I also did the same to the head of each lamp. It was mushroom time, and to make the bioluminescent mushrooms is very simple. I had already covered the stems in hot glue, so all I had to do now was squeeze out a little circle of hot glue onto some parchment paper and let that dry, and that would be my little translucent mushroom top. I just did a lot of these. I was on the fence about making foam clay mushrooms this time around, but my maximalism won out. I just had to. So I proceeded to make a ton of the two kinds that I like to make. The first one is just this shelf fungus that I make by creating a pancake, then carving some grooves into it towards myself. It is very, very easy. It is so fast, and with this particular kind of foam clay, it dries looking pretty much perfect. The other kind I like to make are just some simple cap mushrooms. I do this by just rolling out a little ball and then squishing it into a pancake. Sometimes I detail and texture the top of it a little bit, and then I just roll out a simple stem and I glue them on later once everything is dry. This method allows me to very quickly create a vast army of mushrooms, which I proceeded to paint whenever they were dry the next day. I just did this with my airbrush as usual. It allows me to make the paint job super quick and simple, which is good for this project because I didn't have a lot of extra time here. And as usual, I painted some of these to look like chicken of the woods, some to look like just a generic brown shelf fungi, some to look like Amanita muscara, and some as little generic brown mushrooms.
Alright, it is now time for the part of the project that I have been waiting for all day. That is airbrushing all this stuff.
The lanterns ended up being a little easier to paint than I initially anticipated, which is great. I started by painting the inside of the shades for all of them with a light pale yellow. And with the rest of the lanterns, I started with a light color and got progressively darker with a couple of different layers. The first and lightest layer covered most of the lantern in order to actually get it the color it's supposed to be. And then I went in with a slightly darker, slightly more saturated shadow color and kind of highlighted all of the edges, especially any of the areas near the frame, areas that are just more and shadow. I'm doing this basically to exaggerate things and make sure that the color gets really vibrant whenever the light is on. And then finally I went in with a pretty dark color. It was sometimes brown, sometimes green, sometimes purple, and I went in over all of the edges and the frames again, especially the edges and tips of the flower petals since I was trying to cover up all of that hot glue. I also airbrushed all of the leaves that I had made earlier. I did this in a very similar way, first starting out with a light layer of green to color everything, and then shading all of the edges and veins with a darker green. Whenever I was done, this is what all of those looked like. And while I had the airbrush out, I also colored the stem of the lamp green, added some highlights to that green in a couple of areas, and then went in with the darker brown and shaded the base where all of the rocks and the tree limbs are. And finally, once my leaves were dry, I glued all of those on.
Would you believe it's another day now? Was not able to finish everything last night. I tapped out at around 6 a.m. I might actually redact that in the video, but anyways, at this point, the paint job is more or less locked in. I just have like a little bit of dry brushing to do on everything to bring out the detail a little bit and just like add some highlights, add a little bit more texture. But right now, it is finally time to start gluing on all of the beautiful little details and start assembling everything together. Starting with my little UV resin gemstones. Mainly, I need to figure out a good way to color these when the lamp isn't on so that there's just like a little bit of a tone shining through, and also to give it more variation whenever the lights inside are on. I played around with a couple of ways to do this, but I think the way I've settled on is to just spray a little bit of airbrush paint onto the inside of these because these paints are supposed to be transparent. So hopefully if I do a little bit of that and not go overboard, it'll give me enough of that like subtle hue so that these actually look like something whenever my lamp is off. Again, have not tested this method, so I don't know how well it's gonna work. I don't know how well this paint is going to adhere to the inside of this, so I'm going to give this a test and see what it looks like.
Turns out this method works pretty much perfectly, and I was able to paint the inside of my gemstones with really vibrant fluorescent colors. I did a bunch in pink, purple, and blue, and once those were all painted up, I was able to glue all of them onto my lamp. I think I did end up using all 13 of them, which is maybe a little bit too many, but it's fine. And I followed that up by gluing on all of my little hot glue mushroom tops. I also dry brushed the stem of the flowers, the logs, and all of the rocks in order to bring out more detail. Be a good time to explain how I made these last minute lanterns, and I mean last minute, like within the last few hours of even completing this piece. I almost didn't do them, but I'm glad that I did. First, I cut out 4 big squares, then 4 medium squares, then 4 small squares. These are going to be the tops and bottoms of both lanterns. I then glued each group of 4 together sequentially, thus nearly completing the top and bottom of my lanterns. I then covered the inside of each in a layer of popsicle sticks to make it look like wood, because it is wood. I glued 4 larger popsicle sticks on the corner of each lantern, glued the tops on, glued a couple of braces on each sides, added a few more popsicle sticks here and there for a little bit of extra detail, added a handle to the top with some wire, and once I did all of those steps twice, I had 2 lanterns. I also painted them off camera, and once you add a little candlelight inside, they look like this.
Hi, this has taken absolutely forever, but I am finally on the home stretch of my lamp. This might be the most maximalist thing that I have made yet, and that's saying a lot. Of course, that is definitely not going to stop me from adding even more stuff to this lamp. At this point, I only have gluing on finishing touches left, so that includes all of the mushrooms that I have made, and just an absolute ton of moss, because this is also how I'm going to cover up any of the cords that are showing, any of the kind of like ugly areas where I'm just trying to, you know, hide things and glue gemstones on, that sort of thing. And also, I of course also have my little lanterns, which I decided to make very, very last minute. They almost didn't make it in this project, and then I said, you know what? More. I had to have everything, okay? No compromising on these plans. I want it to look as close to the picture as humanly possible.
I say that, but then I did forget to add the wisteria and the little water droplets. I don't know, maybe the maximalism gods just nerfed me on this one. They said, okay, now that you have to stop.
But I also got some little tea lights at the Dollar Tree. Beautiful. Anyways, I am giving myself about an hour to do all of this because I have to place some kind of limitations on this project. It's spiraling out of control. I have to stop it at some point. And welcome to the end of the video. I figured for the wrap up outro bit, I would bring my old lamp in so that it can become very jealous of my cool new lamp. So very much. I personally absolutely love it. Do you think that we have absolutely gone too far? Or do you think it's good? Tough to say. A few self-critiques. I will say the way I configured the LEDs did make things a little bit busy in the front area here because I am planning on kind of having this face of the lamp face outwards. I probably should have gone with a little bit more of a flow, and I also made that decision on the fly to add in another set of LEDs, which I didn't initially plan on doing just because I realized the way I was gluing them was not going to reach the top, so that's kind of my bad. It did mean that I could have more LEDs in my actual gemstones, so I think that that is a good thing. I think I was able to fix things a little bit and tone it down just by gluing moss over a couple of the LEDs. With something like this that's very abstract and all over the place and a lot, it is difficult to make it look good from like every single angle, but I'm pretty satisfied with what I was able to accomplish. Another critique. I definitely made it too big. I was feeling a little overconfident with how much I could bulk it out since I received the lamp and it was a good bit smaller than I had originally anticipated, and then kind of went overboard there. So at this point, I don't even know if it's going to fit in the spot that I had originally planned on putting it in. I do have a plan B of where I could put it if it doesn't fit there. Yeah, I don't know. Otherwise, I don't have a lot else to say about this. I just like it. I'm happy with how it came out. It's pretty darn close to the original sketch that I did. Anyways, that was a lot of blabbering, but if you liked this, I've made a couple of other things similar to it. One of them was a lamp, one of them was a mirror, one of them was a lantern, and I guess I'll have those videos linked in the description if you want to keep on this whole vibe. It's becoming a weird bedroom set at this point. It makes serotonin number go up. Sir, do you have any closing thoughts for us real quick? She just said to like and subscribe. I'm sorry about that. You guys understand corporate? They're always saying that. Anyways, finally, thank you all so much for watching, especially if you watched till the end. But as always, the biggest thank you for this video and every single one of my videos goes to my patrons and especially my executive producers. You guys are almost as whimsical as this lamp. I would say you're more whimsical, but I mean, look at this thing.
Galaxy Dust 35, Luxabar, My Name is A, Inferno, Miss Fenris, Koichucks, Becca, Nylid Nom, Cyrus Orion, Jenny Craftsma, I Do TKD, Ren, Band Off the Yellow, Cloud Max, Marita Wasner, Philly Smelly, Stabby Horse, Shihibi on My Juies Deli, Ember Creeps, Cardia X, Christina Kimtia Art, Lunira, Fiasco, Mossy Raven, Honolulu Biscuit Giver, Lulu Hana, I'm not saying that name on the internet, ABW Makes, Ice Kavan, A. Wendu, Liana, Ermler Jean, Brian, Phoenix, PNG Not Found, Freedom and Guskus, Cat, Dodo, Zyle S, Agent Sketchy, Thea Maia, Lovisa, Eloquent Silence, Hypnos, Katie, Sweet Winter Garden, Gravity Drop, I Hang Out with Cats at Parties, and Bean the Bread.
The only question now is, what becomes of this? Well, I can always use more potential victims.